Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us on this lovely spring. Did anybody bring the sun with you? And, you know, that would be great to see that reappear. But thank you for joining us and for taking the time to be here for tonight's conversation with the authors of The Hill to Die On. I'm Mary Grant. I'm president of the Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you here. So, again, my thanks to you. This is one of our Getting to the Point conversations, and tonight we're very excited because we have the authors of The Hill to Die On, a new book that chronicles President Trump's first 2 years in office as experienced firsthand on Capitol Hill. The Institute is delighted to convene a discussion that brings to light no shortage of intrigue, yes, but also some real insights as to what's going on. I mean, it's a really fascinating read about the dynamics and behind the scenes at a critically important time in our country, diving into how policy decisions are being made, how we think about them, and the legislative process that drives them. So it's a wonderful read, and we're going to have a chance to hear a little bit more about it tonight. And joining us this evening are the authors of the book, Jake Sherman, who's been at Politico for over a decade now, where he's a senior writer for the news outlet and co-author of the highly consumed Playbook newsletter. His acumen and tenacity in reporting have brought light to the way Congress is working now. Prior to his current role, Jake was in the Washington, D.C. offices of several renowned news publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek magazine, and the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Joining Jake this evening is Anna Palmer, the co-author of the book. She's a senior Washington correspondent for Politico, where she has been since 2011, and a fellow co-author of the widely distributed, highly consumed Playbook email dispatch. She covers all aspects of Congress and politics as large as well as the players on Capitol Hill that make it function. Also of note, Anna is editorial director for Women Rule, a Politico platform dedicated to expanding leadership opportunities for women no matter what stage they are in their careers and their political development. And it's wonderful to have Anna with us this evening. Before the work she's doing presently, she covered House leadership and lobbying at Roll Call and Legal Times. Thank you both for being with us this evening and sharing the stories and the insights through your incredible book. So we're delighted to have you with us. Last year in our political survey that we do looking at civic engagement, one of the things that we found was that when it comes to the Senate in particular, that's what we looked at, that more than 72% to be exact, of American voters expressed dissatisfaction with the legislative body. Another takeaway was that a plurality of voters, 48%, believe that senators should engage in compromise on a regular basis. As Senator Edward Kennedy, the co-founder of this institute, put it so eloquently, what divides us pales in comparison to what unites us. With that mindset, this is what we learned from the survey, legislators should be able to leave party labels behind, leave them at the door, and genuinely work together towards compromise, to work in the common interest, to make a difference, and to move an agenda forward. But we know that that's not always the case, that it's complicated, and it sometimes doesn't work out that way. And while a real set of drama and policy plays out on Capitol Hill, every day in the Institute, we're working with the next generation of leaders who come into this space, try on the role of a United States Senator and a policymaker, and learn the ways of government, learn ways of engaging and having discourse that will bring us together. So it's very exciting what happens at the Institute. I encourage all of you to continue to be a part of it, and I thank you for joining us this evening. And the habits of legislative activity in Washington, D.C. have changed a bit since Senator Kennedy was in office serving the people of Massachusetts, but we are so delighted that this evening we are joined by Steve Scully, who's going to moderate the conversation. Steve worked in the Senator's Media Affairs offices from 1979 to 1982, and he's here to moderate this discussion with us this evening. Currently, Steve is the political editor for C-SPAN, having joined the network almost 30 years ago. Among his responsibilities, Steve coordinates campaign programming for C-SPAN, cspan.org, C-SPAN Radio. In addition to that, he also serves as the regular Sunday host of their Washington Journal Public Affairs program. Previously, Steve had distinguished opportunity to be the White House Correspondent Association president from 2006 to 2007. and it's a true pleasure to welcome Steve to the Institute this evening. I know that we have a few other alumni in the house. I'd like to just give a shout out to J.D. LaRocque and Joe O'Brien, who are here with us this evening. And if there are any other alumni beside my good friend Tara Rendon in the back, I thank you for your service and for what you did every day to make the lives of all of us in Massachusetts richer and better. So I am delighted to invite up our distinguished panel, our fabulous moderator. So please welcome Jake and Anna and Steve to the front of the room to begin tonight's conversation.
Dr. Grant, thank you very, very much. It's amazing to be here. This is just phenomenal. And this is one hell of a book, I have to tell you. So Jake and Anna, we're going to have some fun. Let me get right into it. Quote, on Congress, it is one of the pettiest collections of adults the planet has ever seen, filled with 535 personalities who closely resemble high school class presidents. The leaders dole out seats to their political allies. The less fortunate rabble-rousers get stuck with garbage assignments. So tell me what you really think. Anna, we'll start with you.
Well, first, thanks so much for having us. We're really excited to be here. We've gotten asked a lot about that quote and just kind of our depiction of Congress. And I think what we really wanted to do was portray a realistic view of what happens from our perspective to reporters who have been covering Capitol Hill, you know, living, breathing, kind of in the basements, grabbing members as they come in and out of meetings, about what it's really like, not just the caricature that so many people see on cable news and other things.
Yeah, and I want to thank the Institute for having us, and it's so weird because we spend so much time looking at this actual room, and I feel like
we could never be on the floor.
We could never be on the floor, but usually we're right outside of that door. So
or up in the galleries.
Or up in the gallery right behind, leaning over that thing where it says, don't lean on this. At least it says that in the Capitol. So we were talking about this a little bit before the program, us three, but this book is really kind of an ode to Congress with all of its warts and blemishes. And, you know, I heard a really good maxim from my father when I was a kid and I was first starting to show interest in politics and understanding politics, and he told me, and this is a cynic's view, and I'm a cynic, so it fits me well, that people go to Washington and look to get power, keep power, and increase power. And how they exercise that power obviously is different in depending on the person, but I think what we were trying to illustrate with that is that people exercise their power in funny ways, and by doling out committee assignments to allies and friends, giving gifts, things of that nature.
There are so many different layers in this book, but let's talk about Speaker Ryan. First of all, was he a misfit for Speaker of the House? Because it's clearly a job he never really wanted. He's a policy guy. He's a committee chair. He's the budget guy. He didn't want to be Speaker of the House.
He's a Wisconsin guy. He wears a lot of hats. I'll speak briefly about this, but I'll really let Jake kind of take this one because he covered Paul Ryan and really House Republicans for a long time. But I think what this book shows about Paul Ryan is it's a little disingenuous, right? For him to say, I'm this guy. I didn't really want to be Speaker. Like, you're the number 3 person in power in the U.S. Of course you want to be it, but he would only do it. He kind of has this martyrdom complex where he would only do it if every single person voted for him. So I'm not quite sure if he was a misfit for it because he clearly took the job and then did it. But I don't think he didn't have the enjoyment in exercising the power that I think you see a Speaker Nancy Pelosi have, or certainly a Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, I think a few things. Number one, I think Paul Ryan got on the vice presidential ticket in 2012 and never was able to completely leave that experience behind him, and always had designs that there was something else there for him. And not that he was going to run for president, but he planned to be Ways and Means chairman and then leave. And God had a different plan, I guess. Ryan has a habit of not taking responsibility for things in his own life, meaning he said he just couldn't run for re-election when he had to retire before the election because he just couldn't run for re-election with that guilty conscience of knowing he wasn't going to come back. He just had to become speaker, and he had trouble disassociating free choice, and he just had a difficult time with that. I don't know if he was a misfit. I actually thought when he took the speakership he would be speaker for a long time and be a very successful speaker. I think he got dealt a bad hand. He shaped the Republican Party in his image over about a 10-year period, and then Donald Trump took that image, put it in a trash can, and lit it on fire, and threw it in a river, and sunk it. So I think he got a bad hand, and many believe he played it badly.
Another quote from the book: Paul Ryan thought Donald Trump was disgusting. Trump thought Ryan was useless.
Yeah, I mean, I think
they don't mince words. Let me tell you.
We sat down with the president in the Oval Office after the election.
Paul Ryan.
And Paul Ryan, many times. And I think one of the things that was very clear when speaking with the president, we really weren't talking about what was happening that day or that week, but kind of his relationship with all of the different members of leadership. And I think they really didn't have a lot in common. I think Donald Trump has a lot more in common with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, two politicians he's known for a long time, compared to, from New York and California and being at the same kind of fundraisers, versus a Mitch McConnell out of Kentucky and Paul Ryan out of Wisconsin. But I also think that the way that Donald Trump's politics, as Jake kind of just said, they couldn't be more opposed to the process and the way that to get things done and how to go about it. I think a lot of people forget that Paul Ryan almost pulled his endorsement of the president right before the election, right after the Access Hollywood tape came out. And we asked him about that, because, Mr. President, well, what do you really think about, remember he wasn't really with you all the time. And he said, oh, yeah, that's why I call him Foxhole Paul. He's never in the foxhole with you.
Yeah. One more interesting thing, Stephen, I will let you ask, but we said to him, so why'd you forgive him? We said to the president, why'd you forgive Paul Ryan? And he said, that's just something like, that's just how it is. We needed each other, which is a fascinating admission that basically the president knew that he was a vessel to get things done and was able to shift kind of this hatred. They didn't like each other to, okay, well, maybe this guy could be helpful to me.
But that first moment after the election where President-elect Trump meets with Donald Trump and Paul Ryan, and Trump says, oh, you're a Boy Scout. Tell that story. Yeah,
so right after on election night, and I'm sorry if my back is turned to you, I'm trying to look around as much as I can. On election night...
you're in Wisconsin. You're in Janesville,
I was in Janesville, Wisconsin with the speaker. I wasn't writing this book yet. We weren't writing this book yet. We had no idea that we were going to be writing this book. And Paul Ryan had a press conference scheduled for election night and canceled it. And his staff said to us we would rather just let him sleep the night and wake up in the morning and start anew. And so he spoke to Trump, and they had a fine conversation. They spoke again in the morning, and Ryan called Mike Pence, who was his friend from the House, and they said, we need to get our two staffs together. So Ryan almost immediately flew back to D.C. and had Trump at the Capitol with Melania, gave him a big tour of the Capitol and the Speaker's balcony, which I know this is an institute for the Senate, but has beautiful views of the House, of the National Mall. And they go over to the Capitol Hill Club, which is a private Republican club across the street, and Trump said to him something like, I know what got you. It was that Access Hollywood tape. And Ryan said, yeah, I'm pretty religious, and people just don't talk like that where I'm from. So yeah, it rattled me a little bit. And Melania says, well, oh, you're religious like Pence is religious. And Ryan was like, yeah, I guess. And then Trump said, I get it. You're a Boy Scout. And that is how, from then on, he viewed Ryan as he's the Boy Scout. He can't handle a little rough talk about women. So he called him from then on, for the entire 2-year period, a Boy Scout.
There is no label for Speaker Pelosi, no nickname by this president. Why?
I think he has a lot of respect and almost reverence for her, which I think is surprising. But I think when we sat down with him, we asked him about Pelosi, and I think he can't quite understand her and her power and her ability to get her troops to stay in line. You know, he said, there's a line where he says, you know, Democrats, they have lousy ideas, they're lousy politicians, but they stick together. And in his 2.5 years, Republicans have not stuck together on almost anything. And so I think in a lot of ways, whether it's, you know, the funding debates or, you know, the border wall, she has stared him down and he has blinked twice. And I think he has a lot of respect for that.
We are at an institute where you studied the U.S. Senate, one Ted Kennedy story about 5 years before he died. I happened to see him. C-SPAN is right near the Russell Senate office building. He had the dog Splash, so I used to see him out, and he was so excited about this facility. He'd be so proud of what Mary and everyone is doing here. But let's talk about the Senate, Mitch McConnell and Merrick Garland. Again, from the book. A man who inspires loyalty, I'm talking about Mitch McConnell, by Republican colleagues who never, ever want to cross him, and a hatred by his Democratic foes who say that he is power hungry.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell is probably the biggest object of fascination from everybody who's not in Washington and is interested in politics. And I see a lot of heads nodding, so I guess it's the same here. McConnell, with Merrick Garland, decided very early. He heard Scalia died, and he made an immediate calculation. He was on a plane that was touching down in the Virgin Islands, and he decided immediately he could not give Merrick Garland a hearing, and the next president would have to decide.
That day, it was a Saturday.
On his own. He wrote, I mean, think about this. There's a lot of staffers in this room. There was not a staff meeting or somebody drafting the statement. He himself wrote the statement from vacation.
And he said this amazing thing to us when we interviewed him about this. He said, I had a hunch that Democrats would do the same if they were in that position. And later, I found evidence to back up my hunch, which was Joe Biden had said at one point, basically that if it was in the middle of an election year, a president shouldn't replace a Supreme Court justice.
He called it the Biden rule.
Right, yeah. But Joe Biden didn't like that much.
Not really.
But kind of walk us through the politics that he was facing in the U.S. Senate. Democrats were furious. I can hear Ted Kennedy today. He would have been on the floor yelling at Mitch McConnell.
I mean, I think they were furious, but it also shows the amount of power that the Senate leader in the majority has to whether to bring anything to the floor, to bring anything to a committee, or to halt that process. And I think in a lot of ways we're saying this backstage, but I think a lot of the times Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, their politics are very obviously not similar, but their approach and their kind of ability to pick an endpoint and just ride the criticism no matter what. They don't get a lot of style points for it, but they're often successful on that because they either break people down or they wear them out.
But let's drill down a little bit further, because Merrick Garland was in many ways a consensus choice. He wasn't a polarizing figure. Senate leaders like Orrin Hatch said if you nominate him, he would be confirmed. Yet there was not even a confirmation hearing that's how firm Mitch McConnell was.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a major gamble, and it was almost unprecedented, and the politics of it were a huge risk.
It was totally unprecedented.
Because
it's never happened.
Yeah.
It also appeared at that time that it was going to be a President Hillary Clinton who would probably have picked a more liberal justice for the replacement.
Yeah, and for the institution of the Senate, which is honor-bound, tradition-bound, and remember, there are Republicans like Susan Collins who has voted for every Supreme Court justice, regardless of party, for her 20-something year career in the Senate. So to say to a president, no, we're not even going to give this guy a hearing is absolutely unprecedented. And what was even more amazing to us as reporters when we were watching this is he got almost no public or private pressure from Senate Republicans who were just in lockstep behind him.
Because you have to wonder if in 2020 or 2024, and the situation is different, the Republicans have the Senate, would they follow the McConnell rule?
Well,
I heard a laugh somewhere.
McConnell,
I take that as a no.
McConnell was asked that, I believe, and was not. And I think many Senate Republicans were asked that, and were not as firm as McConnell was, for sure.
Let's stay in the Senate and talk about the vote. You can almost see John McCain coming over here and putting the thumbs down. You tell the story in the book. Anna, what happened and how ticked off was President Trump?
I think that's an understatement.
I'm being polite.
Yes, I mean, well, you have to remember, I mean, you have to kind of set the context. Right now, everybody knows that healthcare imploded, but that was really, Paul Ryan had convinced President Trump that he should do healthcare first, which was very controversial, not to do infrastructure, not to do tax reform. They were going to do healthcare, and it bumbled along the way. And, in some ways, it was really interesting going back and actually watching a lot of C-SPAN tapes of this, but people were very surprised that he voted the way he did with, kind of the thumbs down, the dramatic moment. But we write in the book, and I think it's important, is that he kind of forecasted that he was not okay with the way that this process was done because they were not following precedent, they weren't following procedure. He really wanted the rules of the Senate to be upheld, and I think it's one of the reasons why tax reform was much more successful is because the Senate Majority Leader's staff said no process follows.
And one interesting thing about that is McCain was in the subway on the way from his office to the Senate floor that night, and ran into Chris Murphy from Connecticut. And Murphy and McCain had grown close because they both have an interest in foreign policy, and McCain had a habit of taking young people, regardless of party, under his wing and bringing them to trips abroad and things of that nature. And McCain said to him on the train, "I'm about to do something that will make my party angry at me forever." So he was very cognizant, he was sick at that point, and some people in the administration and in the Senate blamed his illness for that vote, but he was very cognizant about what he was going to do, and it was that last kind of what a lot of people call it the maverick streak.
And it really gives you a sense of the politics of healthcare, because Senator Kennedy, going back to the Nixon administration, battled with Republicans to try to get some sort of a compromise. So this has been 40 plus years of trying to reach some sort of an agreement.
And we're nowhere closer. If anything, I think we're probably further apart at this point for anything in healthcare to get done.
Yeah, and I think also, we've watched healthcare get the battle over healthcare for the last 10 years on Capitol Hill, and we watched the process by which Republicans, or by which Democrats passed it in 2009 and 2010, and then the process by which Republicans tried to undo it in the House, and we were particularly interested in when Donald Trump said no one knew healthcare could be this hard, which a lot of people forget about. And actually, in fact, everyone knew healthcare would be that hard.
Back to the book, Donald Trump, and by the way, the chapter about election night 2016 is fascinating.
Thank you.
Trump's election broke up friendships, frayed or ended marriages, and tested the resilience of America's democracy.
Yeah, I think everybody here probably felt it, right? He is nothing if not a polarizing figure, and people either love Trump or they hate him. And I think one of the more interesting things that we saw, and I think when you're out on the coasts, people often, New York, D.C., California, they kind of can't understand Trump, they can't understand people who maybe support him, but when you look at the makeup of a lot of Senate Republicans that are from the South or the middle of the country, and particularly House Republicans, they go back home and their constituents say, why aren't you defending the president more? And so there's just this real push-pull, I think, where they feel so strongly about it.
Well, tell the Cracker Barrel story on Inauguration Day.
Yeah, so we focus in the book a bunch on the party committees, the DCCC, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, say that 5 times fast, and the NRCC, which is the Republican equivalent. And Dan Cena, who was the executive director of the DCCC in 2016 to 2018, didn't want to be in his office on Inauguration Day 2017. He was a Democrat. He had nothing to celebrate, so he drove north to Pennsylvania to go to Cracker Barrel, and strangely enough, he's a Cracker Barrel devotee. He has the game.
What's not to love?
Well, yeah, it's fine, but I'm not going crazy over it. So he goes up there with his family, packs them in his Pathfinder, and he gets there, and they're wheeling TVs in to watch the inauguration, and he describes it like the Super Bowl. Like, people were saying, we need to make sure we're taping this at home.
This mom says to a daughter, like, don't worry, honey, we're taping it at home. You're going to be able to see it.
Right. And he was shocked by this reaction, which I don't think he had fully internalized, as we say in the book, just how fervently people were supporting the president, basically all over the country in ways that they hadn't thought before. So that kind of guided his thinking for much of the early part of the next 2 years.
Which gets to one of the points that you make in the book is how he was totally underestimated. You talk about how he brought to Washington a cast of misfits. His prescription was all stick and no carrot, and his victory was not predicted by anyone. Nobody. He did not get a single newspaper endorsement anywhere in the country, and yet he wins.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were saying this before, we've said it a lot. I think Jake and I got out of the prediction business after the 2016 cycle.
Exactly.
It's a dangerous place to be. I mean, I think there was it's not even that polling was broken necessarily, because it was really, they were polling the wrong places, right? And nobody looked at Wisconsin, nobody looked at Pennsylvania in a lot of ways that they thought he could win.
Yeah, I think despite what people say now, there are very few, even the NRCC had polling that did that.
RNC thought they were going to lose.
And Reince Priebus calls Paul Ryan on election day and says to him, "You really better get your mind right around President Hillary Clinton, and you could even lose the House." And Ryan responds to Priebus, the chair of the RNC.
And they're good friends, both
And
Wisconsin.
yeah, they worked in McDonald's together, or something like that in Wisconsin when in their teens. Really helped build the Republican Party in Wisconsin. And Ryan says, "I don't think we're going to lose the House, but I'll defer to you on the presidency." I mean, and had no idea that, and it was amazing hearing, afterwards constructing Ryan's thinking as he's watching results at the Holiday Inn in Janesville, Wisconsin, as he's seeing county by county across Wisconsin, counties that hadn't gone for Republicans in years go for Donald Trump, and he's like, oh my God, he's going to win.
Well, I mean, remember, he was trying to save Ron Johnson, the senator the Republican who everybody thought was going to lose.
Sean Spicer told me that after the election, he had assumed that Donald Trump would conform to the presidency as past occupants of the Oval Office had. He was wrong.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought that. I mean, I really think a lot of people thought he was just going to, this was his kind of shtick for the campaign. And then when he came to Washington would kind of bend, him into submission in a lot of ways. But I think the interesting thing about the president is, if you really look back at what he cared about on the campaign trail, for the most part, was truly the border wall. And that is the one thing where he had a real ideology, and he stuck to that. And a lot of the other things, oftentimes his first instinct can be to agree with Democrats before he's kind of pulled back, whether it's on healthcare, whether it's sometimes on immigration, on taxes. He doesn't have those 20 years of public policy and writing, bills and things like that to fall back on.
I would also say, Sean Spicer, we did an event with him, an interview like this, that C-SPAN broadcast actually, and we asked him, is anything going to change? Some version of this question, I don't want to mischaracterize it, but I remember it being some version of, is anything going to change in the way the president handles the press? Specifically that question. Right. And he said that, again, paraphrasing, that was a campaign thing. Now we're in government. So,
clearly that projection was not correct either.
Yeah.
It's online at cspan.org.
Yes.
Check it out. So we reached 250,000 hours. I tell you a real quick story. The very first video that we archived was Senator Kennedy's speech on the Bork nomination, and that began 1989, and we have archived everything since then. So let me go back, though, to your conversation with Senator Mitch McConnell in the office, because it really is fascinating how this guy operates. Can you tell the story? Yeah,
we were trying to find the right moment to interview the Senate Majority Leader. Our book, and I know this is bad to say in the Senate chamber, but was mostly about the House for most of our reporting, and included flashes in the Senate when the story, because House Republicans were more likely to lose the chamber than Senate Republicans. And we walked in and we said we want to talk about judges to McConnell, and he just said, okay, do you mind if I talk for a little bit? And we said, sure. And he spoke for like 32 or 33 minutes straight.
And how remarkable is that?
I mean, it's shocking.
He's a quiet guy.
He's a man of few words. He picks his words very carefully, typically.
And he went back from his history, and we chronicle this in the book, of being an intern, being a young staffer working at the Department of Justice, all through his Senate career, about how he viewed the judiciary and how he tried to get the president, the new president, to understand the importance and the unique ability with Republicans controlling the Senate and the White House of reshaping the judiciary for decades to come.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say the thing that's so interesting is he was so single-mindedly focused on it. And we came in to speak with him after the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation, which was clearly a kind of tearing the country apart. There was protests on Capitol Hill that we had never, in my reporting time, had ever seen, where people were almost, coming up and, trying to touch and attack senators, and there were, it was almost like a police state. And you wondered, and I think our editor really wanted to say, wasn't there, did he grapple with it? Was there the ethics of it all? And at the end of this chapter, he says, so what did you think about, what was your mindset at the end of the, after Kavanaugh had passed? And he said, I was on cable news. Every speech I gave was being broadcast on all cable networks. All the talk radio, hosts who usually tell me, call me a squish, are saying I'm leading the charge. My poll numbers are up. I know it won't last, but for the moment, I'm a rock star.
Two other key players, and we were talking with Dr. Grant about Mark Meadows, formerly from University of North Carolina in Nashville before she came here to Boston, and he played a key role before Election Day trying to force a challenge on Paul Ryan in 2016.
Yeah, he didn't like Paul Ryan. He didn't like John Boehner either. He said it was nothing personal, but he, in 2015, went to the House floor and was on the brink of filing a motion did file a motion to force the ejection of John Boehner. John Boehner later resigned, and he had designs, if Hillary Clinton would win, that he was going to send Jim Jordan, or they agreed to send Jim Jordan to New York, another conservative member of the House, to announce a challenge to Paul Ryan on Fox News. And it was an amazing scene. Mark Meadows is in his apartment in downtown Washington, and with the members of the House Freedom Caucus, the small conservative, or growing at the time conservative group that he led, and he got a message on his cell phone that said, from Paul Ryan, said, "If you're going to kneecap me, at least let me know," with a bunch of shamrock emojis, which is really funny. And I reminded Paul Ryan of this years later, and he was laughing about it. So he had really big plans to change the leadership atop the party. Donald Trump won. They decided to stick together with Paul Ryan, behind Paul Ryan, something I never asked them, but something they probably regretted at different points during those next 2 years.
The end of the book, you talk about the midterm elections of 2018, calling it seismic, historic, unprecedented. Why?
Well, it was an unprecedented loss. I mean, I think Republicans knew it was going to be hard for them to keep the chamber in the House, because typically 2 years in, the president's party always loses. But they lost by epic numbers. I think you also saw a cultural shift, right? There's a chapter in the book that really deals with the Me Too kind of movement and how the Senate and the House had to grapple with that. And you saw more women for the first time running. You also had, the return of Speaker Nancy Pelosi, something that I don't think a lot of people expected to happen. And she kind of fought her way tooth and nail, and now is, probably the most powerful person in Washington.
Yeah, and also it's just, and Mitch McConnell always says this, the American people prefer divided government because, I don't have the statistic at hand, I think it's in the book, but for much of the last X amount of years, pick your number of years, there has been divided government in Washington. So it was historic also in the sense that this rare period of time where one party controlled all the levers of power, they were exiting, and that was also particularly unique.
Again, what makes this book so fascinating is the stories, and the one story, and you can't make this up, Republican leaders go to Camp David. They watch, of all movies, The Greatest Showman, the story of P.T. Barnum. When I first heard that, I thought, how appropriate. And the PowerPoint presentation by Kevin McCarthy. So set the stage and how this all came about, leading up to the 2018 midterm elections and trying to nudge the president to do a few things to protect the House.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin McCarthy knew, all the statistics, and he was trying to train the president on the issue of what they could do to try to save the House. And he had designs on, we need to get the president out of the West Wing, out of Washington. And he actually, I think he went to Ivanka Trump, right? And he, to try to get her to say, hey, like, let's go to Camp David, let's go somewhere. And so she kind of did that. We made the case for him, and so they retreat to Camp David, and he had a whole presentation and was basically really trying to train the president's mind on infrastructure, things that needed to happen, some wins that they could get so that they could try to sell the American public and keep their majority.
Yeah, he had this. Kevin McCarthy likes statistics, and he has very strange statistics that describe whatever situation you're really trying to describe. He says no party ever wins the majority without a professional athlete in their ranks. So whenever he sees a professional athlete running, he assumes that party's going to take the majority. I'm not sure that's statistically significant, but he believes in this stuff, and he's usually right. And he had this presentation that for the president that had, you are Bill Clinton in 1998. You have a good economy, you're under siege, and there was one more, and I think he was talking about how Democrats shut down the government. Chuck Schumer had a disagreement with the president, a short shutdown at the beginning of the year. His whole goal was to get the president to lean in the small things that could move the needle with the small segments of the population that he believed he needed to win the majority. And of course, after the presentation, Trump liked it and told people afterwards he liked it. But after the presentation, he said something like, I don't believe these polls anyway. So it's tough to get the president to rally around data that he doesn't believe.
And he didn't. I mean, he didn't change course. He didn't all of a sudden try to think more about how to keep House Republican majority. And even afterward, didn't take any responsibility for the loss. Whereas both George W. Bush and Obama, who they had massive losses in the House after their first 2 years, took, I think they called it a thumping. They both took responsibility for it. And he actually told us he thought that Republicans losing might actually help him, and they could get more done because Republicans were too, ideologically restrained. And with Democrats, they could just bring him a bill, and he could decide whether or not he was going to sign it.
And we see how that's worked out for him with Democrats.
Where's Jerry Nadler?
Yeah, right.
How do you get the president to focus? Because you've been around him, you've interviewed him, we've all seen how he can just go off on a tangent and not follow any script whatsoever.
Well, we had a different situation with him in which we were there to not talk about him really that much. We wanted his reflections on other people a lot more, because we decided by that point, when we had a long interview with him, we were practically done with the book. Not totally. We had about 2 months left of reporting, then the government shutdown happened, and that screwed up our plans. But we weren't going to him for confirmation of things. We were going to him for reflections about incidents that he was a part of or about people that he dealt with. And he did go off on tangents, but sometimes the tangents were actually quite interesting. This is not an insult, so I don't mean it as an insult, but it's like free association. When he goes off on a tangent, he's triggered something in his mind that led him to the next point, and that's always interesting to see what that is. Excuse me.
Is he reelected?
Out of the prediction game.
Yeah, after 2016. It's a dangerous place to be.
I can tell you.
I know what you're...
No, I was going to say one of the people running is going to be president, but I guess that's not even true, since a new person seems to be running every day. So.
Yeah. So from the book, and I have to ask you about the title, you say that Congress screws things up, shuts down the government, raises taxes, spend money on endless war, all while members collect fat paychecks. So The Hill to Die On is the title. How did you come up with that?
Well,
luck.
Yeah. It was actually, it was the title when we wrote the proposal. But I think when you're up on the Hill, that it can be a phrase that relates to so many different members and also different issues, right? So many members, whether it's healthcare, that's going to be their hill to die on. Whether it's immigration for some of the conservatives, that's going to be their hill to die on. Or is it going to be opposing the president? And so it was a title where we felt like it was accessible because it's a phrase people know, but it also is really reflective of kind of the ethos of the place.
Yeah, and also, and we didn't know what the president's hill to die on would be, but I mean, he listened to Paul Ryan, and the one of the main arcs of the book is he listened to Paul Ryan for so many months and delayed his fight on the border wall, which was a central campaign promise. No surprise to anybody that he wanted a border wall built. Paul Ryan convinced him to delay it, got to the end of Republican Washington, and the president entered into the longest shutdown in American history over that issue. So that was his hill to die on.
We're going to get to your questions, and we're going to start on those VIP seats up there. So if you have a microphone ready,
that's where we sit. So that's those are
with the
VIP
good
seats.
spots.
You write about the clubbiness of Congress and the clubbiness of the Senate. Anna?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things we wanted to do was really peel back a layer of Washington, and that is, how do these interpersonal relationships work? There's a lot of drinking, there's a lot of long hours, there's a lot of that kind of sense of I'm part of one of the 100 in the Senate, and that you're special. And in some ways you are special, right? You get a very large salary for a lot of these people that are coming from states that they otherwise would not get paid to do that. They're treated like rock stars. They've got staff doing their every whim. So in a lot of ways, I think we wanted to make sure that people understood that. It's not a characterization of good or bad. It's just what it actually is.
There's this amazing thing that didn't make the book, but Kevin McCarthy on the campaign trail, I'm not even sure you know this, but he used to have this line in stump speeches where he would say, it would get to the end and he would say, when I become speaker or when I win re-election, you're going to all come with me to the Capitol and I'm going to show you this amazing portrait I have of, I think, Abe Lincoln. Not the point of the story. But people, even when they're outside of Washington, make you think that they're part of this like mythical club that is just Congress, and it's so interesting, and they're whisked away on jets, government jets to world capitals. And in the Senate, I would say it's more acute than anywhere else, because when you're a senator like Ted Kennedy or now Mitt Romney even, you are treated like a prime minister when you go to another country and like a head of state, and that's kind of crazy. I mean, it's really interesting.
And when they leave, they often have a real culture shock, right? I remember when Trent Lott left the Senate, and he'd been in leadership for a very long time. He didn't own a winter coat because he was so used to the motorcade picking him up and dropping him off wherever he went.
That's how people talk about that at DC all the time, that Tim Geithner never wore a winter coat. Former Treasury Secretary would get out of the car in the, right in front of the building and get back in afterwards.
I interviewed him and Senator Breaux when they left and went down to lobby, and they also didn't know how to call out. They didn't realize you had to dial 9 because they probably hadn't dialed a phone in 25 years.
But you're always part of the club. That's the crazy thing. I mean, we still see Trent Lott walking around the Capitol all the time. He still parks his Mini Cooper with the Mississippi plates right outside the Capitol like things never changed. He's part of a secret society called Chowder and Marching. Steve, you probably know about that.
Absolutely.
But it meets every Wednesday in the Capitol, and we've long wanted to do a story about this, but I think our time has passed on that. Once you're in the club, you're always part of the club. It's amazing. Joe Scarborough, who hosts Morning Joe, was once a member of the House, could go on.
I know, he reminds us every morning.
He reminds people every morning.
Sorry about that.
He oftentimes says, maybe not recently, but during the Obama years, and I think the first Trump State of the Union, he just walked onto the House floor because you have lifetime privileges. So it's like once you get elected, and it's crazy, right? Because there's only 600,000 people who are in a district for a House race, sometimes 150,000 vote or something like that, even less. And you are a lifetime member of Congress.
2 quick final points. First, every author says, boy, there's something I wish I could have put in the book but didn't make it. Was there one thing that you wanted in the book? One quote, one anecdote, one moment?
Yes and no. I mean, I wanted everything in the book. I hated when they cut things.
There's very small things that we had to... I think for the most part, a lot of it got in. I do think there were some things that, we're nerds and we're Congress nerds, and so it was, I think, helpful for us to have an editor who was not of Washington, not just doing these kinds of books. And so it was really kind of put the pressure on us to make sure that while hopefully you really enjoy the book, but my mom in North Dakota could also, there was some accessibility there.
We also got really great access, and we say this in the book, and I'm going to get to my point about what we left out, but we got access to meetings, to fundraisers, to phone calls, conference calls, blah, 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 blah. And we both traveled for the book to bring the story to life. And I went to New Orleans for a fundraiser, Steve Scully's fundraiser with Mike Pence, where I had a lot of great material and great color that just didn't fit anywhere in the book. And that was disappointing, but the book is already 400 pages, and our editor felt pretty clear that it needed to stay at that.
We also spent a lot of time with Joe Crowley, and I don't think we anticipated he would be a much bigger character in the book.
Final question, then we'll get to your questions. You're both very humble in your biography. Basically, if you read the biography at the end of the book, you never thought you'd be doing this. So just very quickly talk about your roots in North Dakota and coming to Washington and thinking that I'm not going to get a job.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I write in the acknowledgments. So I mean, I grew up on a farm, a town of 600 people in North Dakota, and I wanted to be a journalist since I was in second grade. And I don't have any ties in Washington, and as much as this is a club, it's a total club in Washington of connections and people knowing everybody. And so I really, I did a bunch of internships and decided I didn't have a job after college, and I had my waitress shoes and my resumes, and I just kind of was able to luck into, I work really hard and kind of you fake it till you make it, but it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, I kind of always knew I wanted to be a reporter and was a nerd and worked on my college paper, but we've had moments during this book where we've turned to each other and been like, whoa, what happened here? Like, how did we get here? Like, a couple of years ago, we were just writing daily stories for Politico, which we write Playbook as Dr. Grant mentioned at the top. But we were just writing stories, and we were on the Colbert Show, and we looked at each other like, where did this come from? But the really cool thing about the book was, someone said to me, and we were freaking out about how it was being received, or how it would be received commercially. And a friend of mine says, people either love Trump or they hate Trump. I'm not sure they're ready for a middle-of-the-road assessment of Congress in the era of Trump. And the good thing is, I think people have come to the judgment, and the Republicans and Democrats that have read it agree that this is kind of just what drives the book is not an ideology. It's the stories in the book and the behind-the-scenes stuff we were able to get. And we're most proud that we've not had one substantive complaint about anything in the book, which is really difficult when you write 140,000 words. And I had dreams, trust me, about this book blowing up, and I screwed it up somehow. But even at the White House, people at the White House that I talked to said they loved it, and they thought it was a really interesting view of Congress.
And I think you're going to love it. It's a great read. Let's get to your questions, and we're going to start up in the balcony, the VIP section. Who has a question up there? Anyone? If not, I'm going to run up and ask you a question. Yes, go ahead. Right there.
We're going to quiz you.
Yeah, right over there. Stand up if you would. Yes.
You have a mic coming.
There's a mic coming
to your left.
Thank you for starting us off.
I wonder if you have any insights about the relationship between Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump. Today in the morning news, there were the commentary of Joe Manchin and Anna Navarro, both very passionate about what happened to the Lindsey Graham we knew. So wondered if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, but this is a question we get a lot too.
I would say, I think a couple things. I think this book actually illustrates it a lot, is that oftentimes people's politics are for the moment that they're in at that time, and they can be pretty fungible. And I think what you see now is the Lindsey Graham who needs to win re-election. And I think he's actually talked about it, really. I think he did a local TV report, and he said, I don't agree with the president on everything, but I was elected by the people of South Carolina to do a job and to represent the state. And so when I can work with and they elected me to work with this president. And so I think that that was in the context of when the president was criticizing Senator John McCain, and he forcefully said he didn't like that the president was doing that, but he still needed to do his job.
And also, one question that we get a lot is, and Anna alluded to this before, but one comment we got a lot from Republican leaders on Capitol Hill, I don't remember which one said this, but all of them said some variation of this. If you look at what Donald Trump, if you ignore, and I know it's hard for some people to ignore the tweets and some of the comments that people on the left might not like, but the policies that Donald Trump has enacted, the judges that he's selected, the people in his administration, by and large, are the same people, policies, and outlines that any Republican president, including Jeb Bush, and all the people that the president clashed with would have done. I mean, this tax bill that the president signed is a tax bill that Republicans have been dreaming up in some way, shape, or form for many years. That's neither a criticism nor a praise. That's just a fact. So, and I think Lindsey Graham's relationship with the president reflects that he believes he'll take some lumps. He doesn't like the McCain stuff, but at the end of the day, he has a relationship with the president which allows him to be productive, which I think he finds useful.
And he's a golfing buddy.
He's a very good golfer, for Graham and the president, from what I understand. I've not played with either of them, but if they're watching, I'm a bad golfer, so I'm happy to play with them.
We'll stay up on the balcony if there's another question. Otherwise, we'll come down here. Is there one up there? Anyone?
Oh, right here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Hello, thank you.
Hi.
Hello. Come on down.
or ask from there. Either way.
Yes, this is good. You portray the president as just some guy in a very neutral way, but he's not. He is like no president that I've ever observed in my lifetime or read about, and it seems misleading for us all to sit here and talk about what's going on Capitol Hill without somehow acknowledging what that other side that you see people want to just push it aside. To me, it makes it okay. He treats people so badly. He seems to be driven by self-interest, seems to not accept expertise or expert advice from people around him. I'm very concerned about that part of him, but it doesn't seem to be at all about what you're talking about here.
I think what we tried to do was show a book about Congress in the era. Sure. I think what we tried to write, though, was a book about Congress in the era of Trump. Trump is like, I would say, kind of like the wallpaper. He is a character, but he's not a main character of this book. I do think, to your point, that yes, this president has busted a lot of norms, and I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about in this kind of book tour is what the tail of that is. How long will will this change different things forever? Whether it's the news cycle, whether it's how presidents treat the press, which I find how he does very disconcerting. But I think I don't know if you've read the book. I don't think the book is necessarily a positive about the president. I think we try to take a very realistic view of him, whether that's him not paying attention in meetings or how his administration approached kind of naively, with a lot of naivete, Congress, and how sometimes his approach worked, and a lot of times how Congress stopped him.
Let me just read one quote, and I paraphrase it, but President Trump's confidants were a Washington cast of misfits. He did not care for official Washington. He was the embodiment of voter frustration. Trump's prescription was all stick and no carrot.
Yeah, this is neither a positive nor negative depiction of him. It's a depiction through the eyes of members of Congress who were elected by their constituents, many of whom elected the president also. And people are free to vote for whoever they want. But one thing that we've observed through the last 2 years is people, and I'm not saying you, I'm just saying our reflection from being reporters from 2016 until now, is that people look to the media to undo what happened in 2016 because they don't like the president or they don't like what's happened in the last 2 years. That's not our job. We didn't write a book that was supposed to be we didn't write a lecture to the president. We wrote a book about characters on Capitol Hill and how they dealt with the president legislating, both Republicans and Democrats, and wrote extensively about both parties.
Thank you for the question. Down here, who has a question? Yes, go ahead. We'll get you a mic.
You mentioned something earlier with John McCain, Chris Murphy. And,
Yeah.
You need the, hi, John
Hi.
McCain and Chris Murphy, and how John McCain would take people under their wing, and almost alluding to a generational thing. What we have now is, and I'm going to bring her up, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but she has kind of linked up with Senator Ed Markey, who of course spent years in the House and now is in the Senate. But he is in many ways, even though a relatively new senator, he's also old guard for that.
Yep.
And the other story that I actually heard, and in my mind it makes sense, and I'm wondering if you're going to confirm this. One of the early things when Representative Ocasio-Cortez showed up on there, and there was the environmental protest in Nancy Pelosi's office, and at the same time I heard later that she gave a seminar on how to use Twitter. So I'm wondering about those generational things.
Yeah.
In this particular case, we're talking within the Democrats, but with McCain it was across party line.
Yeah, so one thing that I found interesting, which is, and I'll answer directly your question afterwards, is that Ed Markey has been talking about many of the issues that AOC, I'm just abbreviating for time's sake, has been talking about for like 20, he's been talking about it for 20 years, and then she busts onto the scene and everyone's like, oh my God, great ideas. And he's been I've watched him go to press conferences that no one shows up to, and that's not a criticism of him, it's just that people weren't as interested until she got to office. Yeah, there's definitely a generational shift in the House Democratic caucus at the moment, and you had a caucus that was depleted in a lot of senses. There's a lot of reasons for it. People believed Nancy Pelosi and the leadership structure hung around for too long. People weren't able to rise, so they looked elsewhere. Ed Markey's one of them, although I'm not sure I'd put him in that category, but Chris Van Hollen from Maryland, Rahm Emanuel, who went to be mayor of Chicago, Javier Becerra, who's now the Attorney General of California. People look to move up in the House and be a fresh face in leadership, and we're not able to because Pelosi's been in power for a long time. There definitely is, and yes, AOC did give a Twitter lesson of sorts to members of the Democratic caucus, many of whom don't tweet themselves anyway, but whatever. I think there's a learning curve for somebody like AOC, and that's, again, not a criticism, but the House is a very tough place to break into. It's not like the Senate. It's very difficult to do something as one member of the House. And so I think she's beginning to try to figure out given the huge celebrity that she is, where she fits in kind of the tapestry of Congress. Is that fair, you think?
I think that's totally fair. The other thing I would just say is I think one of the challenges with this new, very large freshman class for House Democrats and House Democratic leadership in particular is that most of them haven't spent their entire career wanting to be a member of Congress. They haven't grown up in party politics. And so they are...
Much like the Republican class of 2010.
Right. They're much more willing to freelance and go and make their own decisions. And I think they're way more comfortable talking off the cuff and being on Twitter. And I can't remember who told us this, but I mean, it was so true before, the only people who would go on cable news would be the speaker, leadership, and chairman. And now you have freshmen going on cable news all the time talking about whatever issue that they really care about. And not that they shouldn't, it's just you really see this, I think, tension / just real shift in terms of how the party is going to operate.
And that really is reflective of where the two parties are right now, and the challenges for Speaker Boehner and now Speaker Pelosi. Another question down here. Who has it? Yes, right over here, sir, in the back. Yeah, thank you. There's a microphone right next to you.
Is there any talk in Washington about the doing away with the electoral college?
There's always some talk about it.
Nothing serious,
I haven't
though.
seen it gain any steam, but there always is, depending on the election results in that presidential year, discussion of it, yeah. But
Another
again,
question?
not very serious.
Yes, go ahead. We got to get your mic. And then somebody over there next.
Does Trump's complete absence of foreign policy experience scare the hell out of you?
Well, I would say this. I think, first of all, the Senate has a huge role in foreign policy, whatever you think of the president. And you've seen the Senate recently push back on Trump on several elements of foreign policy. And you've seen Lindsey Graham privately try to shape the president's views. Again, the president was elected on an unambiguous platform on foreign policy. There was no question what he wanted to do. He said the war in Iraq was stupid. He wanted to get troops out of Afghanistan, and he has tried with some success, because Congress still has a role, to do that. And I could tell you this, a lot behind the scenes, a lot of Republicans find his views on North Korea refreshing, and his views on foreign policy refreshing, meaning that he is not trying to, this is what they tell me, I'm not espousing this myself, they believe he's not trying to achieve the unachievable. He's accepting things, and this has not been American foreign policy in the past, accepting the shortcomings of some countries, human rights and other things, and saying, you know what, we're not going to change them on that, but maybe we can change them around the margins on other things. That's been some view in Republican and Democratic politics for a long time. Trump is just by far the most prominent and loudest voice on that topic.
It's not in the book, but it's in the news. How concerned should we be about Iran?
I would be concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, I think anytime you're dealing with,
Rogue nations?
yeah, rogue nations and a president who has been untested in some of these kinds of, yes, refreshing maybe to some, I think, I think it's disconcerting.
And also, the Secretary of Defense is not confirmed yet and new, and is not a military leader. Ran Boeing, which is a certain set of experiences, but not the traditional set of experiences that other secretaries of defense have had.
We had a question over here. Yes, go ahead. Right over there. Right here. Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know where you are in your book tour. I'm just wondering how this book plays in other parts of the country and what kinds of feedback you've had. You're in a very liberal area right here.
Yes.
But there may be different comments, and people may not be so happy about hearing that their congressmen aren't always the shining stars that they think they might be.
But you've been the best audience. So.
Yeah, you.
Yes. No, I think
We're mostly in big cities.
A book tour like this is a lot of cable news and other kind of doing a lot of radio and things like that, and then you go to big cities like this. But I actually think we've been, I think, pretty pleasantly surprised that Republicans and conservatives have been very supportive of this book, and so have liberals. And I think that's what we really tried to. We wanted it to be a reported book about the first 2 years of, Congress and Washington in the era of this president. We knew it was going to be a wild ride. You had a change candidate and a change election coming to Washington, pledging to change the way that a city and government that has stayed in, rules and traditions, that it was going to be an interesting story to tell. But I actually feel really positive about how it's been received, because if conservatives and liberals can both come to us and have said privately and publicly on a lot of television stations that this was a really great book and you really captured the essence of it, I mean, I'll take that.
Yeah, Fox News hosts have said it's great to us privately and publicly. Hugh Hewitt, who's a conservative radio host, loves it, and then we've gotten great praise from the most liberal people also, so that's cool. And the White House and pretty much everybody has said it's fair. I've spoken to,
even if they don't like it, it's fair.
I've spoken to all the main characters who might have had gripes around the edges, but liked it. We're not experts on Trump. We've only interacted with him a handful of times, but we do figure that after 10 plus years in the Capitol dealing with people of both parties every single day, that we have a good grip on them, and we're there when they don't want us to be there and when they do want us to be there, so they're pretty comfortable with us. And I will say, the one thing I always say about this topic is, if you're a reporter and your job is to break news, which that's our job, we're not a partisan news outlet, there's no business in us being outwardly partisan. I mean, if Republicans and Democrats won't talk to you, then you're not going to keep a job in our business for too long unless you're on cable news or at a partisan outlet. So we tried to play it down the middle with everybody and just tell the stories that they told us, and that's what we feel our job is.
Another question. Let's take one more from up there and then one or two down here, depending on the time. If there's somebody up there that has a question, don't be shy. We want to hear from you.
Even if you want to yell at us.
Yeah, right over there. And then if somebody down here wants to get ready, we'll get a microphone in place. Great questions, by the way. Thank you.
Yes, very great.
You mentioned earlier that the American people prefer divided governments. I just wanted to ask if you could elaborate on that, why, and sort of how can people look beyond the spectacle if they're voting?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically
The numbers bear it out.
Yeah, the history bears it out, but it's also because I think oftentimes when you have one party in power, they produce bills and laws that kind of swing the pendulum, and oftentimes what the American public is more comfortable with is the messiness of compromise. That it's difficult to get there, but that's really where, what they're looking for.
Yeah, I would just think about since Obama was elected, right? Had all Democratic Washington from 2008 to 2010, then Republicans took over the House, became the largest majority since Herbert Hoover. The country still elected Barack Obama, put Republicans in charge of the Senate, elected all Republican Washington, and then the House flipped in a major way to Democrats. So it's just, it happens over and over again, which is really bizarre. We have a very bizarre country in that respect, I think.
Which is why we need to study the Senate.
Yes.
Question over here. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Earlier you said that a lot of newspapers endorse President Trump, but
no, very few.
That's right.
Yeah.
Most of them endorsed Senator Clinton, but there was one that endorsed President Trump, and that was the Las Vegas Review, owned by Sheldon Edelman. Edelson. And I felt that President Obama dropped the ball because he didn't go to the Scalia funeral, and if he wanted to get Garland through, even if he disagreed with Scalia, he should at least put on the good face and played the role as president at that funeral. And I've also been checking out, I'm a Republican, and I've been checking out state Republicans, and they're just so bitter. They hate AOC, they hate the Muslim lady from Minnesota, and they just everything is just so hateful. It's the state parties, Wisconsin, Utah, they're older, mostly young people are going independent, and those state parties have taken on the personality of President Trump. Wisconsin.
Well, let me take your question. Is the Republican Party the party of Donald Trump?
What you're saying is really interesting in the sense that that's another question we get all the time. Is this the part? Let me add a variation to what you're saying, which is, will the Republican Party? So Republicans, from when they took over the majority, said we're not going to spend a lot of money. We're going to be sober leaders that are very calm and measured, and that's how we're going to lead the country. Obviously, it's changed. Republicans are spending a lot more money, and Trump is obviously quite a bombastic guy. And will the party ever go back to not what Donald Trump was? And we don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's tough to say. Just on your earlier question about Scalia, there were a lot of reasons, and actually a friend of ours, Carl Hulse of the New York Times, is writing a book right now on judicial nominations, which will deal a lot with Merrick Garland and the Scalia episode and everything like that. But there are a lot of reasons that didn't get through. Mitch McConnell was a huge reason, I'd say, in that. But yeah, I mean, there's no question that the tenor and tone of politics has gotten rough, and it's not only Donald Trump's fault. It was rough before Donald Trump. It's probably gotten a little bit rougher under Trump, right?
Yeah, but it's not only Republicans.
No, it's Democrats too.
Democrats too. I think there's what it really bears out, whether it's Bernie Sanders, and a lot of the people on the, further on the left side. I think there's just a frustration when you go around the country and you travel with politicians. I think that, to me, on both sides, is the frustration, and then the people who they feel like are. I think a lot of conservatives feel like Donald Trump voices their frustration.
This very smart person over here gets the final question. Thank you.
Will we ever hear Robert Mueller testify?
Well,
Speaking on behalf of C-SPAN, yes, I hope so.
Yes, I think we hope so.
It'd be a ratings bonanza.
Let's take out our crystal ball.
Yeah, right. I know. Again, we don't really make predictions. I think it's going to depend what happens with with whether they can figure out a way to find some compromise between this White House and Democratic leaders.
Yeah,
It doesn't seem likely right now, though.
It does seem like many of these questions, maybe not that included, but many of these questions about the Trump administration's non-cooperation with oversight are going to be decided by a court, perhaps in short order. So, I will say this cooperation is not started. This lack of cooperation is not new. Every administration tries to not give over a lot to Congress. This level of it is definitely new. We've never seen anything like this before, and it's going to have to be decided by a court because clearly
they're not going to come to a compromise.
House Democrats in the Trump White House are not going to come to a compromise. And by the way, remember, Trump said this is what he wanted. He didn't care Democrats took back the House. He thought it would be easier for him to deal with the House Democrats and House Republicans.
Which is why if we ever needed Edward Moore Kennedy in the Senate,
Yeah,
it's right now. And by the way, he was the best boss ever. Final question for both of you. How and why did the book come about?
Well, it wasn't something we were looking to do. We met with an agent, and they really wanted us to write a book about.
We said, nah.
About Congress in the era of Trump, because they said writing a book about Trump is really difficult because he changes his mind all the time. We certainly are not Trump whisperers by any stretch. And we said no, like we're not interested. And so, but we went back, and I think a couple weeks later, we said, we have so many stories, we have these anecdotes, all the kind of clubbiness of Washington and how it works. And so we just kind of started a riff that turned into 10,000 words. And then I'll let Jake finish it off.
Yeah, we had great support from our significant others. Anna's is here. Mine is at home, probably putting our son to sleep. We did this proposal because we felt like the stars were really aligned for us in a weird way, mostly because we had great relationships with Paul Ryan, Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, all these people who were in power they're not our friends, but we've been dealing with them all for such a long time. So we kind of went to all of them after we signed the book deal and said, we'd like to interview you and your aides. We knew all these people, we weren't new to this, and said, we're going to interview you, but we're not going to release any of this until 2019 when the book comes out. Now, people said, well, what if you've discovered, yes, if I discovered that Nancy Pelosi or Paul Ryan murdered somebody, we would have had a dilemma on our hands. But anything short of that, we honored that commitment.
And I think, we were talking about this before, but I really do feel like there are members of Congress, and they look at any president and they say, I was here before him, I'm going to be here after him. But there's so much focus in the press on the White House. And we really benefited from the fact that everybody's kind of chasing the next story. And certainly this president gives you a zillion stories a day to chase. And so we had these relationships with members and their staff, but their story often doesn't get told. And that we were willing to really spend a lot of time and hours reconstructing how healthcare failed, how tax reform, was able to be successful, and kind of the fighting and the ground of how they were going to, recruit candidates and do the campaign. And you really had some really rich characters. But I do think because they often feel like they get short shrift, they were willing to be pretty open with us in a way that oftentimes when you're on a daily deadline, you just don't get that kind of access.
And one more point on this, sure. And then I'm sure we'll have to wrap up. Yeah, we really benefited by the access we have in the Capitol, the literal access, not just us. Reporters roam absolutely free all over the Capitol except for the floors. And there are areas that are demarcated for press and members, nobody else. So you really can't escape the press, no matter if you want to or not. And I mean, we stand right out there in the Senate and over there, and in the House, there's a lobby that runs behind the length of the House floor where you could just talk to members of Congress. So it's really a great place. There's no fake news, none of that stuff. And I've never heard that in the Capitol once in all the time I've been up there. So we were lucky, and we're lucky for C-SPAN because C-SPAN archives everything, and we used it a lot to recreate speeches and things, public appearances that we missed or didn't write down good enough quotes from.
Dare I ask, is there another book in you?
On that note, this one first.
Two housekeeping notes. First of all, there will be a book signing afterwards, so the conversation will continue. Second of all, you have been a marvelous audience.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you
you
for
so
coming
much.
on a beautiful spring evening here in Boston. Let me thank Jake Sherman, Anna Palmer. Thank you very much for being with us.
Anna and Jake for lifting up a curtain on a very fascinating topic and leaving us to judge whether we like what we see behind the curtain and what goes on. So thank you for that. Steve, for great questions and moving the conversation and being such a fabulous representative of the Kennedy staff who have gone on to do spectacular work. Thank all of you for coming. We appreciate you being here. And I want to go back to a statement that was made about liking divided government. That may be the outcome. I think what we want is we don't like a divided country. And I think that's the work for all of us as we think about the work of the Institute, the work that we do in our everyday lives to try to pull people together, to create community, to understand and bridge differences. That's on us to do as part of a functioning and active and vigorous democracy. So thank you for contributing it and for a wonderful evening. We're going to be holding a series on as candidates running for president, so please pay attention to that. We have one coming next week. Governor Bill Weld will be with us to talk about why he's running for president. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to the team and the staff here. Thank you to our great panel.